They came for our blood. We gave them something else. The last Snickers bar on Earth had been eaten 14 months ago by a man named Dirk, who'd found it inside a vending machine in the ruins of a Chevron station outside Barstow. He remembered the exact moment, the waxy smell of it, the way the caramel pulled at his back teeth. He told the story every third night, always with the same words, always with the same ending, and then it was gone, and then everything was gone. Nobody laughed anymore when he said it. They just listened, because the small things were the only things left, worth holding. He was telling it again when Macon spotted the figure. She was up on the armored runner of the Centurion, a gutted 2019 F-350. They'd welded grates and steel plating onto until it looked less like a truck, and more like something a very aggressive medieval blacksmith might have designed. Her goggles down against the noon sun glare, the Mojave was doing its usual thing. White sky, white sand, and the distant brown nothing that passed for a horizon. Heat shimmer made the scrub brush dance at the edges of the visible world. Everything the same as yesterday and the day before. Then she saw it, a silhouette. Dirk. He was already reaching for the .308. I see it. One bullet, she said, the rule. They had 12 rounds left for that rifle, and each one was a separate decision. You didn't put a second shot through something that one shot could answer. He settled the stock against his shoulder. Through the scope, the figure resolved into a man. That much was clear from the gait, the proportions. Human, upright, walking with the stupid, swaying persistence of something that had forgotten it, should probably be dead by now. Dirk exhaled and squeezed. The figure stumbled, dropped to one knee, stayed there. They drove out to where he'd fallen, their hands on their weapons the whole way, because you never assumed. The last person who'd assumed had been Carver. And Carver was still lying in the ditch outside Victorville, with the bite mark on his throat. The Ravathi didn't look like what you expected. They looked like men. That was the whole problem. But this one bled red, and when they got him in the truck and stripped off his jacket to pack the shoulder wound, there was no bioluminescent tracery under the skin, no secondary irises, no subcutaneous ridge structure along the spine. He was just a man, shot unconscious, with no identification, no gear beyond a cracked water bottle and a folding knife, and no memory of anything at all when he woke up. "What's your name?" Macon asked him. He looked at her for a long time. His eyes were dark brown and surprisingly steady for someone who'd just taken a rifle round through the shoulder. "I don't know," he said. She looked at Dirk. Dirk shrugged. "We'll call you Thorn," she said. "You look like a thorn." He turned the name over in his mouth like he was tasting it. "Okay," he said finally. "Sure." That was day one. The camp was 37 kilometers north of what had been the I-15 corridor, built in and around a dry riverbed that had, against all odds, found water. Not much, a subsurface seep that fed a hand-dug well, whose output they measured in careful daily liters, but enough. In a world where the Ravathi's metabolic restructuring had done something to the hydrological cycle that the surviving hydrologists couldn't quite agree on, enough water was the same as being king. Dallas ran the camp. He was a former county sheriff who had transitioned from upholding the law to simply being the largest available object that bad outcomes could be directed at. He had a jaw like a folded cinder block, and a habit of speaking slowly and clearly when things were bad, which meant he'd been speaking slowly and clearly for about a year and a half. 32 people sheltered in the camp, eating from whatever could be scrounged, traded, or grown in the 3 raised beds they'd built behind the main structure. Nights were fortified. Every 15 minutes, someone was on watch. The Ravathi came at night. They always came at night. That was one of the few things everyone agreed on. The creatures that had once been human, converted, restructured, remade from the cellular level up by whatever the alien pathogen had done when it first touched the water supply, first touched the air, first touched the wet membranes of the eyes and lungs of 600 million people. Those things could not tolerate direct sunlight. The UV exposure did something catastrophic to their restructured chromatin. They knew this in the same instinctive way they knew to drink blood, to pursue warmth, to flock toward the electromagnetic signatures of still-functioning human nervous systems. They were not stupid. They'd lost language but not problem-solving. They'd lost sentiment but not strategy. 3 nights ago they'd tried to pull the fencing down in 2 places simultaneously. Coordinated. Planned. Someone in the dark had given an order. Dallas spent the day after staring at the fence and not saying anything for a very long time. Thorne recovered fast. Too fast, Susan said, though she was a veterinarian by training and operated as their medic. Mostly because nobody else had survived med school. The wound sealed in 48 hours. No sign of infection. His shoulder was moving normally before the end of the first week. Faster than normal, she told Dallas. Significantly faster. Is he one of them? His blood reads human. White count, red count, everything in normal range. No bioluminescence, no secondary structure. He drinks water without seizing. She paused. He just heals fast. Any theories? A few. She didn't share them immediately, which was Susan's way of saying she had exactly one theory. And it was the kind that kept her up at night. Thorne, for his part, was useful. He worked. He didn't complain. He ate what was put in front of him, with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that food was fuel, and had apparently all understood this. Somewhere beneath whatever he'd forgotten, he was good with his hands. Better than good. On his 3rd day in camp, he took apart one of their 2 failing water pumps and fixed it with a piece of wire and part of a broken shovel handle, working by feel in the dark because they were conserving generator fuel. Macon watched him do it and afterward told Dirk that it was the strangest thing she'd ever seen. Like he wasn't thinking about it, she said. Like his hand just knew. Combat muscle memory, maybe, Dirk said. Former military, maybe. She watched Thorne across the camp, where he was now helping someone patch a section of fence, moving with that same eerie efficiency. Or something else. He didn't talk much about his past, because there was no past to talk about. But he talked about other things in the quiet way of someone who finds words reliable tools. He talked to Macon about radio propagation. She'd been trying to reach some signal that had been pulsing on 2 megahertz for 3 weeks, and without really explaining how he knew, walked her through a modification to their antenna that doubled the signal clarity. That night they heard voices for the first time. A community somewhere northeast, past the Nevada border, calling into the dark. He talked to Dirk about the story of the last Snickers bar and added his own. A coffee cup he'd once held, ceramic hot, the specific weight of it. No context for the cup, no face attached to the memory, just the cup and the warmth of it, and the fact that it had mattered enough to survive, whatever had eaten everything else. Dirk thought about that for a while and then said, "At least you still got something." "Yeah," Thorne said. "At least I've got that." It was Nakata who watched him most carefully. She'd arrived at the camp 6 weeks before Thorne, driving the armored Land Cruiser, with the flamethrower attachment, in the gun position, alone, with dried blood on her jacket that belonged to someone else. Her name was Nakata, she said. That was all she said about herself for the first 2 weeks. Dallas didn't push. Nobody pushed. Everyone in the camp had arrived, carrying something they weren't ready to put down, and the general understanding was that you could keep carrying it until you couldn't anymore. What Nakata was carrying was Kevin. His name came out gradually in fragments, the way a river sometimes exposes old buried things when the water drops. Kevin, who had been a mechanical engineer before the collapse. Kevin, who had been afraid of heights, but not of the dark. Kevin, who had taken the bite at a dead gas station 300 miles south, and had held a shotgun to his own chest while the infection worked its way into his blood. She didn't tell anyone she'd pulled the trigger. She didn't have to. She watched Thorne the way she'd once watched Kevin. Carefully, measuring, looking for the thing that meant she'd have to pull a trigger again. She found it hard to like him for this reason. She found it hard to like anything that had walked out of the Saints desert that had taken Kevin in. But she watched him long enough to notice what Susan had noticed. The healing, the competence, The way he woke up the first morning in a new position, a trained defensive crouch, and didn't know why. And the way he looked at full water containers. The way something in him went careful and still. Not like thirst, like recognition. She didn't say anything to Dallas yet. The attack came on a Tuesday, though days of the week had mostly stopped meaning anything, except as an agreed upon coordinate for when to rotate watch shifts. In the weeks before the attack, the camp had settled into the rhythms of a place that had decided to survive. Morning watch rotations, midday rationing sessions, afternoon work projects organized by Dallas, with the methodical practicality of a man who understood that idleness was its own kind of danger. People who had nothing to do had time to count what they'd lost, and counting what you'd lost could hollow you out from the inside faster than anything the Ravathi could do. Thorn worked his way into the rhythm of the camp with the ease of someone returning to a language they thought they'd forgotten. He was useful in ways that revealed themselves gradually. His mechanical competence was the first thing, the pump, then a cracked axle on the Jeep, then the camp's aging solar array, which had been producing at 40% capacity for 2 months, and which he brought back to 70% over the course of an afternoon with nothing but careful attention and a length of reclaimed wire. He didn't explain how he knew what he knew. It came out of his hands, the way walking comes out of your legs. Automatic, precognitive, located below the level of conscious decision. He was less certain about his social competence. He watched people carefully, in the way of someone who suspects that watching carefully might be a substitute for some more direct mode of connection. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he said what he meant without decoration, which some people read as curtness and others read as respect. Macon decided early that it was respect. Susan decided it was probably both. Dallas was too busy to decide anything about it. He just found that when Thorne said something, it was worth listening to. Dirk he liked immediately, and without analysis, the way you sometimes like someone, because they are genuinely, unstrategically themselves. Nakata he was more careful with. Not because he didn't trust her. He thought he probably trusted her more than he trusted most people, and he wasn't sure why, and that uncertainty was itself a kind of information he wasn't sure what to do with. But she watched him the way someone watches a thing they haven't decided about yet, and he respected that enough to give her the space to keep watching. It was on his 5th night in camp that he first heard Nakata hum. She was checking the fence line, her hour of watch, and he was unable to sleep, and sitting against the exterior wall of the main building, and in the dark he heard it, a tune, quiet, with no words attached. The kind of humming that doesn't know it's doing anything, the kind that comes from inside the body's idling, instead of from conscious performance. He didn't know the melody. He wasn't sure he would know any melody, but something in the pattern of it, the specific intervals, the shape of the phrase, landed in him in a way that wasn't neutral, the way the coffee cup memory landed. Not recognition, something adjacent to recognition. She stopped when she noticed he was there. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't know anyone was up." "Don't stop," he said. A pause. It was something Kevin used to sing. I don't know where he got it. He didn't know either. He just said it was stuck in his head, and then it got stuck in mine. He didn't say anything. "It's strange," she said. "Some things survive that shouldn't, some things don't that should." She was quiet for a moment. The tune survived. Kevin didn't. She didn't say it bitterly, just as fact examined. "Feels like the universe has bad prioritization. Humans kept it in memory," Thorne said. The tune. Two people who didn't know where it came from, passing it forward. That's not bad prioritization. That's the thing that works. Nakata was quiet for a long moment. "That's either profound, or you're just good at making things sound that way." "Probably the second one," he said. She almost laughed. It was the closest she'd come to laughing since Kevin, and she felt it in her chest like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. The attack came on a Tuesday, though days of the week had mostly stopped meaning anything except as an agreed-upon coordinate for when to rotate watch shifts. The Ravathi hit the northern perimeter at a 300 with a force that Thorne estimated at 40 individuals. He was the one who did the counting, standing at the embrasure, with night vision goggles that had been scavenged from the ruins of a National Guard depot 3 months ago, calling numbers into the dark to Dallas. 42, maybe 45. They're moving in loose formation, wide spacing, no clustering. They've done this before. They always have, Dallas said. No. Thorne's voice was flat and certain. The spacing is tactical. They're keeping each other out of the blast radius of whatever defensive line they think we have. Dallas looked at him. They're learning, Thorne said. That was the night 3 of the camp's defenders were hurt, and 1 was killed. Her name was Orsini. She'd been a school teacher from Fresno. She had a habit of humming while she worked, and none of them had known what song it was. And now they would never know. They buried her at dawn. Thorne stood at the grave, and Dallas noticed that he dug harder than anyone else and filled faster. And when it was done, he stood at the mound of dirt for a long moment with his hands at his sides, not praying exactly, not grieving exactly, doing something that didn't have a name, something that looked like reckoning. You know something, Dallas said later. I know some things, Thorne said. I don't know which ones matter yet. Start with the ones that might keep us alive. Thorne was quiet for a moment. They were standing in the camp's central space, an open area between the main building and the vehicle bay, where a folding table served as both map station and mess hall. The afternoon was hot and white and still. The Ravathi, Thorne said slowly, the ones who attacked last night. They weren't random. Someone led them. Someone with planning capacity, with tactical reasoning, with the ability to communicate complex position instructions. We've known there were leaders. Not like this. He tapped the map. The spacing they used last night. It's not inherited behavior. It's not instinct. It's not even learned pack behavior. That's trained formation movement. That's drill. Someone is training them. Dallas looked at the map and then at Thorne. How do you know what trained formation movement looks like? Thorne looked back at him evenly. I don't know, he said, but I know. Susan called Dallas to the medical bay that evening. It was a shipping container they'd insulated and lit with a single battery-powered lantern, smelling of antiseptic and rust. She had Thorne's most recent blood work on the bench, slides she'd prepared on a battery-powered microscope, careful hatched handwriting on the labels. Susan had been a veterinarian in Fresno. This fact she delivered without apology or embarrassment when it came up, which was always early in any medical conversation. She'd been the best veterinarian in her practice. Methodical, inventive, the kind of doctor who stayed 2 hours past close because the next case was interesting. And the difference between veterinary practice and human medicine was, she thought, mostly about paperwork and assumptions. The biology was the same. The principles were the same. And in a world where a vet was the only medical option, she had found that most people dropped their objection to the relevant credential fairly quickly. She had saved 11 lives in the camp. She counted them privately, in her own accounting, and didn't tell anyone about the counting. She also counted the 4 she hadn't saved, in the same ledger, with equal care. Thorne she had treated and monitored, with the particular attention she reserved for unusual cases. The anomalies that told you something about what normal actually meant, by illustrating how much variation existed within it. I've been looking at this wrong, she said. I kept checking for Ravathi conversion markers because that's what we're trained to look for. The bioluminescence, the secondary cellular structure, the changes to the mitochondrial architecture. She paused. I found none of those things, and then I stopped looking for what he isn't and started looking for what he is. She put a slide under the scope and stepped back so Dallas could look. Through the eyepiece, he saw red blood cells that looked normal, mostly, and then something else. Pale structures, woven between cells, gossamer fine, integrated into the tissue at the level that most things didn't touch. Not alien, not exactly human. What am I looking at? He said. I think, Susan said carefully, that I'm looking at what happens when the Ravathi pathogen infects a human host and fails. Fails how? fails to convert. The pathogen tries to rewrite the cellular architecture. In 99% of cases, it succeeds. The host converts, loses higher cognitive function, loses language, loses water tolerance, gains photosensitivity, gains the blood imperative. She pointed at the slide. In a very small number of cases, the host's immune system manages something extraordinary. It doesn't defeat the pathogen. It negotiates with it. The pathogen integrates without converting. The structures you're looking at are the physical record of that negotiation. Dallas straightened. And the amnesia? The cost of the negotiation. Whatever process produces those structures requires extraordinary metabolic resources. My best guess, and it is a guess, is that the brain protects itself by offloading long-term memory storage. The memories are probably still there somewhere. The immune process just rearranged the access pathways. Is he contagious? No. The integrated pathogen is stable. It's not replicating in a transmissible form. She paused. But here's the thing, Dallas. The structure I'm looking at, if it can be isolated, understood, synthesized, it might be a template. The immune response that created it might be teachable. You're talking about a cure. I'm talking about a starting point. Dallas sat down on the edge of the medical bench and looked at the ceiling for a long time. We'd need equipment we don't have, Susan said. A centrifuge at minimum. Gel electrophoresis equipment, a PCR setup. A real lab, or something close enough. The signal we've been receiving from Nevada, Dallas said. The community northeast. That's what I was thinking. We'd have to travel. We'd have to travel, they told Thorne that night. He sat across from Dallas and Susan in the dim lantern light and listened to everything with the same careful stillness he brought to everything. When Susan finished, he was quiet for a long time. You're saying my blood might be useful, he said. Your blood might be the most important thing currently existing on Earth, Susan said. Yes. He looked at his hands for a moment. Those competent, scarred hands that knew things he didn't know they knew. Then he looked up. How far to the Nevada community? 400 kilometers, mostly interstate. The Vathi don't hold fixed positions on open road in daylight. We move in daylight. We move fast. We should be okay. Should, Dallas confirmed. There's a group called the Reavers that controls a stretch of the old I-15 corridor. Strictly human. Not friendly. Not friendly how? They found a water source 6 months ago, and they have been, enthusiastically, protecting it. 3 groups have tried to pass through their stretch of road. None of them made it. Thorne nodded slowly. How many vehicles do we have? 4 operational. The Centurion, the Land Cruiser, the Jeep with the welded cage, and the box truck. The box truck is the slowest and the most important, because it would carry Susan and her equipment. What weapons? Dallas told him. Thorne absorbed the inventory, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head, arriving at an answer they expected and didn't love. It's enough, he said, if we're smart about it. Are we smart about it? Dirk said from the back of the room. Thorne looked at him. We'd better be. Nakata found him an hour later, sitting on the hood of the Land Cruiser in the dark, with his legs crossed and his face turned up toward the sky. She climbed up and sat beside him without asking. The stars were extraordinary out here. One of the few things the collapse had given back. The light pollution was gone, and the Milky Way cut across the black, like a wound someone had tried to cauterize with silver thread. I want to know about Kevin, she said. The sentence surprised both of them. She hadn't planned to say it, but there it was, out in the night air, and there was no taking it back. Thorne turned to look at her. I don't know Kevin. I know, but you're, like him. What you are. The thing in your blood. He had it too, I think. He survived a bite. He didn't convert. He kept his memory. She paused. He kept it right up until the end. He wasn't immune, Thorne said quietly. No. He was still changing. Just slower. He had maybe another month before he wouldn't have been Kevin anymore. She looked at the stars. He didn't want to wait for that. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. That's what the hydrophobia means, he said. It wasn't a question. What? Susan told me. In the partially converted state, the state between bite and full Urvathati transformation. There's a period of increased water sensitivity. Not the full photophobia and blood drive, but the hydrophobia appears early. It's one of the first markers. He looked at her. I still drink water without any reaction. Whatever happened in my case, it happened completely. Kevin's case didn't resolve the same way. He was immune to the sunlight thing. Near the end, he could still go out in the day. The daywalker stories, Thorne said softly. The ones Dirk talks about. The friend of a friend accounts. Not the full Ravathi. Not human either. Something in between, with some of the attributes of both. That's what Kevin was. That's what Kevin was. He paused. He was brave. Nakata didn't say anything for a moment. Then he was scared. Being brave is just scared with somewhere to put it. She climbed down from the hood and walked back toward the main building. At the edge of the lamplight, she stopped. Don't be a hero on this road trip, she said. Be smart. Heroes leave people behind. She went inside. Thorne sat on the hood for another hour, looking at the sky, his hands on his knees, making the kind of internal calculations that don't have numbers. They left at dawn, minus 30 minutes, when the sky was gray and colorless, and the first purple light was beginning to bleed in from the east. The Ravathi in the area had retreated to whatever cover they used. Drainage culverts, abandoned structures, any shadow thick enough to buffer UV exposure. The window was about 6 hours before the sun got low enough on its arc to be tricky. The departure itself took 40 minutes, because departures always took longer than planned. The box truck had developed a fuel leak overnight that required patching. Mira was found hiding in the cargo area of the Jeep and had to be returned to Emily with considerable negotiation. One of the camp's other fighters, a man named Reeves, whose particular combat skill was useful enough that Dallas had considered bringing him along, came down with a fever that Susan judged infectious, which ended that consideration. Small human problems layering themselves over the catastrophic human situation the way they always did. Because logistics didn't care about scale, Thorne used the 40 minutes to sit with the motorcycle in the vehicle bay and think. He'd learned to think like this, not as a continuous narrative, but as a series of positions, the way a chess player thinks several moves ahead without necessarily articulating each step. The positions were, the coordinator knows we're moving. They've been tracking me since I arrived in the camp. They had the interstate ambush launch prepared within 48 hours of our departure plans being made, which means either surveillance capability I haven't accounted for, or direct network access to my signal, which I've been broadcasting continuously. If it's the latter, they know our planned route. We should vary it. He told Dallas this, briefly, while Dallas ran through the departure checklist. Change the route, Dallas said immediately. Not the whole route. We can't avoid the Reaver territory without a 200-kilometer detour that costs us too much daylight. But the approach from the west and the stretch after Reaver territory, change those. You think they have someone in the Reaver group? I think they may have surveillance on the road west of the Reaver blockade. The attack was on that stretch. That's where they've been effective before. He thought about it. Not penetration of the Reaver group, more like ambient awareness. The network gives them positional data on a large number of heat signatures. They can identify convoy movement patterns. How do we counter that? We split earlier and join later. Run the vehicles in a pattern that looks like 4 separate contacts, rather than a coordinated convoy, until we're past the most exposed section. He paused. And I ride separately from the beginning, not as part of the convoy at all. Dallas looked at him. If I'm broadcasting, Thorne said, then I'm the signal. Separate me from the research and the personnel, and the coordinator has to choose between following the signal and following the convoy. And they'll follow you. They'll follow me. I'm the threat to their network. The cure in the hands of a scientist they've never encountered doesn't read the same way. Dallas was quiet for a long moment. Then, tell me the part where this isn't a plan to sacrifice yourself. The convoy moves fast. The coordinator moves toward me. We use that. Thorne described the second phase, Nakata circling wide, the simultaneous approach from multiple angles. the window of disruption that the coordinator's physical proximity to the action would create. If I can do to their formation what I did at the interstate, modulate the signal, disrupt their coordination, and simultaneously, Nakata and the Jeep are in position. You can do that? The modulation. Reaver was training me on it in the sessions. I can do it for maybe 30 seconds at the intensity we'd need. Maybe 40. That's enough? It has to be. Dallas ran through it twice more before agreeing. He had the quality of a man who committed fully to a decision once made, and questioned it not at all afterward, which was a quality that had kept 32 people alive for a year and a half. All right, he said. We do it your way. Dallas drove the Centurion. Thorne rode a motorcycle they'd found in the Nevada compound's vehicle bay, a big adventure touring bike that had been maintained by someone with both skill and affection, whose tires were good and whose engine ran clean. He rode 50 meters ahead of the lead vehicle, alone, visible, broadcasting into the network, with the door deliberately cracked. Here I am. Here, come and find me. He felt them orient. Thorne watched it all with the expression of someone trying to remember a dream. Everything was familiar in a way that didn't attach to any specific memory. The texture of it, the scale of the road, the visual language of the interstate, the way the mountains sat against the horizon. All of it resonated in him like struck metal, vibrating at a frequency just below recognition. Nakata rode in the Land Cruiser behind him. He could see her in the side mirror, steady, watching the road and the mirrors with equal attention. She drove the way, she did everything, with a kind of considered efficiency that was not cold, but that didn't waste anything. He thought about what she'd said the night before, scared with somewhere to put it. He had decided, somewhere in the last week, that Nakata was the most honest person he'd ever met, which was a strange thing to conclude about a person he'd known for less than a month, and which he thought was probably accurate anyway. He also thought about the seventh vehicle, the coordinator. He'd been opening the signal a little at a time in the morning sessions with Reaver, practicing the modulation, learning the granularity of it, how to be present in the network without broadcasting his position, how to narrow his output to a tight focused probe rather than an omnidirectional signal. He was imprecise at it still. Reaver compared it to learning to whisper after a lifetime of shouting. The musculature was wrong, developed for a different purpose, and the finesse took time. But he was getting there. He thought about the coordinator's plan, running it from their perspective. They had a highly coordinated Ravathi force, superior in numbers, mobile, capable of organized tactical maneuver. They had been broadcasting their location since they woke up in a desert. They had every advantage except the one that mattered. They didn't know what the immune had been doing in Nevada for 3 days. They didn't know that the immune was no longer broadcasting out of ignorance. They didn't know that what looked like vulnerability was a choice. The Ravathi were excellent at identifying and eliminating threats. They were less excellent at considering that the thing they'd classified as a threat might have classified them in return. You've been on this road, Dallas said. I've been on roads like this. Which direction? Thorne thought. The thought was more sensation than information, a lean in a direction that the body knew before the mind did. East, he said. There's nothing east of here for the first 100 kilometers, just desert. Something east, Thorne said. Something that matters. Dallas kept driving. They found the first Reaver sign 48 kilometers in, a painted board on a highway overpass that said road closed, violators executed. Below it, with less artistic care, someone had added the words, no exceptions. Subtle, Dirk said over the radio. Keep moving, Dallas said. We knew about this. The Reaver vehicles appeared 6 kilometers later. 3 modified pickup trucks and an armored school bus parked diagonally across both lanes of the interstate, creating a chicane that nothing could pass at speed without threading the exact gap they wanted you to thread. Men and women on the vehicles, armed in the mixture of practical gear and theatrical post-apocalyptic ornamentation that Thorne had noticed, characterized most of the surviving human groups he'd heard about. People put things on their clothing when they were scared. It was a way of saying, I am still here. I am still a self. My self is capable of making choices about what I wear. He understood it, even if he couldn't remember doing it himself. Dallas slowed the convoy to a stop 50 meters from the blockade and left the engine running. A woman walked out from behind the bus. She was tall, perhaps 40, with the kind of face that had been beautiful once and was now something more, functional and harder to categorize. She held a shotgun in a way that was very practiced, not theatrical, the barrel angled down and to the right in the carry position that you only settled into if you'd carried long enough that the gun was just part of your arm. Behind her on the vehicles, the Reavers watched with the studied neutrality of professionals who were capable of action and were choosing, for the moment, not to take it. They were well fed, Thorne noticed. Better than the camp. Their gear was in better condition. They had power, a generator running somewhere behind the bus, and the specific confidence of a group that has held what it has for long enough to start believing it will continue holding it. That confidence was its own kind of danger. Groups that had things worth taking developed a permanent low-level readiness that was indistinguishable from the outside, from hostility. He didn't blame them for it. He'd have the same readiness in their position. Far enough, she said. She didn't shout it. She projected it. There was a difference. We're looking for passage, Dallas called. Medical mission. We're not here to take your water. Nobody's here to take our water, the woman said. They're always here for something else. The water just happens to come with it. We need to reach the Nevada community. East of Vegas, broadcasting 1.2 megahertz. We have a medical researcher. I know who's broadcasting on 2 megahertz. She was walking toward them now, unhurried. The men on the bus and trucks had their weapons up, but hadn't aimed them measured. Professional. Name's Mannheim, she said, stopping 10 meters from the Centurion. I run this stretch. What are you offering for passage? Fuel, Dallas said. 40 liters of diesel. Mannheim considered. Her eyes moved along the convoy with the practiced assessor speed of someone who had done inventory, of approaching groups many, many times. When they reached Thorne, they stopped. You, she said. Thorne met her gaze. I've heard about you, Mannheim said. Not you specifically, what you are. Daywalker, some people call it. Living immune. She looked at him without hostility. Without warmth either. Just the neutral evaluation of someone calculating odds. Reaver territory has a standusting offer for someone like you. The right medical team gets first access to the blood work. We've been building toward that capacity for 6 months. She paused. You go to Nevada, and that offer goes to a community you've never met. The Nevada community has the equipment to do something useful with that blood work. Susan called from the box truck. Do you? Mannheim was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. No, she said, not yet. She stepped aside. Take your 40 liters and get your people through. But you hear me. Whatever they find in Nevada, the formula comes back this way. That's the toll. We can agree to that, Dallas said. Thorne said nothing. He was watching Mannheim's face, and he thought she was telling the truth, and he thought she was afraid. In the same way, all the surviving humans were afraid. And he thought she'd probably been someone very reasonable once, before reasonable stopped being enough. Deal. She nodded once. The school bus moved. They were through by noon. The country east of the blockade was different, emptier, more open, the desert giving way to lower elevation scrubland, and then to a series of dry lakes that shimmered with false water in the heat. Thorne watched the landscape and felt the lean intensify. Whatever was east, it was closer now. Pull over, he said. Dallas looked at him. Please, just for a minute. Dallas slowed the Centurion and stopped on the shoulder. The rest of the convoy pulled up behind them. Thorne climbed out and walked to the edge of the roadway and stood looking east, into the brown and the white and the heat shimmer, with his hands loose at his sides and his face very still. Nakata climbed out of the Land Cruiser and walked up behind him. What is it? She said. Something. He shook his head. I can't get there from here. It's like, you know how some words in another language don't translate. There's just the feeling of what they mean, but the meaning won't fit into words you have? Yeah, it's like that. There's something east that I know, and I know it matters, and I can't get any closer to it than that. Nakata watched his profile for a moment. Kevin used to say, she said slowly, that toward the end, he had moments where he knew things he shouldn't know. About the Ravathi. Their movement patterns, their communication frequencies. Like a radio that picks up stations you didn't tune to. She paused. He said it was the scariest part. Not the burning in sunlight. Not the water thing. The knowledge coming from somewhere else. Thorn was very still. He said it was like having two people in one head, she continued. And he couldn't always tell which one was doing the thinking. I know, Thorn said quietly. It was the first time he'd acknowledged it. Nakata didn't push further. She walked back to the Land Cruiser, and he stood for another 30 seconds in the heat. And then he came back too, and they drove east. The Ravathi found them at kilometer 280, 90 minutes from the Nevada community. They came out of a dry wash to the north. 6 vehicles, modified, spiked, carrying approximately 25 individuals who moved with the coordinated efficiency that Thorn had warned Dallas about. Not random attack behavior. Not the opportunistic rush of the hunger-driven Ravathi that most of the camps had learned to manage. Something else. Something organized. Something that had planned this. They knew the route, Thorn said, watching through the windshield as the vehicles spread into a flanking formation with practiced speed. Somehow they knew we were coming. How? The same way I know things. His voice was flat. There's communication happening that we can't hear. Can you hear it? Thorn was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something happened in his face that Dallas couldn't quite read. A kind of interior pressure, like watching someone try to push through a door that was almost but not quite open. Then turn left, 40 degrees. The first vehicle on the left flank is the command vehicle. If you can disable it, the formation will lose coherence for 40 seconds, maybe 60. How do you? Left, Thorn said. Now. Dallas turned. The Centurion cut across the desert surface in a spray of gravel, and the Ravathi flanking vehicle tried to compensate and caught the edge of the dry wash embankment at speed. The front right wheel dropping into a gully with sound like a gun going off. The vehicle lurching violently to a stop. The formation behind it fragmented, not disastrously, but visibly. The tight spacing loosening into something improvised. 40 seconds, Thorn said. Get the box truck ahead. Susan, Dallas said into the radio. Full throttle straight east. Don't stop. The box truck's engine wound up, and it accelerated past the flanking vehicles into the open desert, shaking violently on the uneven surface. Susan's voice briefly audible over the radio, saying something that wasn't polite. The remaining Ravathi vehicles regrouped. Less organized now, angrier, moving with the particular ferocious simplicity of things that have lost their strategy and are running on something more basic. The Jeep took a hit from a spiked ram attachment. Macon's voice over the radio, clipped and controlled. Rear left panel. No casualties. Still mobile. Nakata, Thorn said. He switched frequencies. The vehicle on your 2 o'clock. The one with the smoke projectors on the cab. That's the next command link. After that, they fragment. You're sure? No, he said. But that's my strong read. He heard her exhale once. Then, on it, the Land Cruiser's flamethrower coughed to life, with the hollow whump of ignition that Thorn felt in his chest even at distance, and a sheet of fire hit the smoke projector vehicle broadside, and the Ravathi inside it scattered, with the particular panicked urgency of creatures that fear fire on an almost genetic level. The remaining vehicles pulled back, not retreating fully, circling at range, maintaining presence, but no longer pressing the attack with coordination. They're waiting, Thorn said. For what? For night. He checked the sun angle. We have 3 hours of useful daylight. The Nevada community is 90 minutes out. We need to move. If we stop moving, they'll close again? If we stop moving, they'll close again. Dallas got on the radio and told everyone to keep moving and to not look back and to trust the box truck to keep up. The box truck kept up. They came in sight of the Nevada community, a former mining facility that had been expanded and fortified into something that looked, from a distance, like a small walled town. With 40 minutes of daylight left, the walls were concrete construction blocks and salvaged steel sheeting feet high, and there was a gate that opened for them before they were fully stopped, operated by people who had clearly been watching their approach for some time. The person who met them at the gate was a scientist named Reaver. A coincidence of naming that made Dirk start to say something before Macon stopped him with an elbow, who was short, precise, and in a state of barely controlled excitement that was unusual in a world where excitement had mostly been replaced by vigilance. "You're them," Reaver said, looking at Thorne with the expression of someone seeing a thing they had theorized about extensively and not quite believed they would ever actually see. "The immune. You're actually them." "He's a person," Nakata said. Reaver blinked. Yes, of course. I'm sorry." She extended her hand. "We've been building toward this for a year. We have the equipment. We've been refining the process. We needed the template." She was still looking at Thorne. "May I? With your permission." "You can take what you need," Thorne said. "That's why we came." He let Susan and Reaver draw 4 vials of blood and walk him through their preliminary tests and hold quiet, intense conversations over microscopes, while Macon and Dirk ate actual food. The Nevada community had a functioning greenhouse, beans and squash and corn, impossible treasure, and Dallas spoke with the community's council about the Ravathi formation attacks and the intelligence about training and coordination. Nakata sat with Thorne in the medical bay while the tests ran, not talking, just present in the way she'd decided she could afford to be present with someone she'd initially thought she'd have to shoot. "Kevin would have liked this place," she said eventually. Thorne considered the room. The light, the quiet competence of the people moving through it, the smell of actual chemical reagents and actual science happening. Yeah, he liked the places where people were trying to solve something. He said the difference between the world before and the world after wasn't the technology or the resources or any of the stuff people talked about. It was just that after, nobody had the luxury of not trying to solve things. He sounds like he thought about things carefully. He thought about everything carefully. It was sometimes annoying. She smiled, briefly and entirely. Mostly it wasn't. Reaver came to them 3 hours later with results. "The integration structure in your blood is unlike anything we've sequenced before," she said. "It's not a mutation in the conventional sense. It's more like a negotiated coexistence. The pathogen is present and active, but it has been domesticated by the immune response. The antibodies that achieved this aren't produced naturally in any host we've sampled. They were produced in you uniquely, as a response to a very specific set of conditions." "Can it be replicated?" Susan asked. "With time, with resources, with the right precursors." Reaver was looking at her own hands rather than at Thorne. "There's something else. The antibody structure. It's not just neutralizing the pathogen. It's communicating with it. At a chemical signaling level, the pathogen in your blood is inert because it's been incorporated into your signaling network. It's answering your body's chemistry rather than running its own program. Meaning? Meaning the knowledge you have, the tactical information you can't explain, the ability to read Ravathi formation behavior, to identify command structures. That isn't mystical. That's the pathogen's original intelligence network, which spans the entire Vavath collective, being channeled through your blood chemistry instead of theirs." The room was very quiet. "You're a receiver," Reaver said. "You're connected to the same network they are. You've just been accessing it without knowing how." Thorne was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands, those competent, scarred hands. "Can I control it?" he said. "We don't know yet, but we can try to find out." They stayed 3 days at the Nevada community. 3 days of blood, draws and tests, and careful, painstaking work by Reaver's team, who were the kind of exhausted, but functional scientists that only exist when they are working on the only problem that matters. Susan watched everything, and took notes and asked questions that made Reaver stop and reconsider her answers twice. Macon fixed 3 things that were broken in the community's infrastructure without being asked. Dirk told the story of the last Snickers bar to an audience of 11 people who listened the way Dallas's camp had stopped listening. Rapt, the way you listen when a story is new, and the small, ordinary details still sound like treasure. The Nevada community had 103 people. It had, at its peak 8 months ago, had 141. The math of the missing was in everyone's face the way it was in every surviving community. Present as absence, a kind of negative space that people navigated around without speaking it aloud. Their leader was a man named Yusuf, who had been a civil engineer, and now applied the same systematic pragmatism to keeping 103 people alive that he had once applied to bridge stress tolerances. He wore the strain of it in the way he never fully sat down, always leaning, always oriented toward the nearest exit, the nearest threat vector, as though his body had concluded that relaxation was too expensive to maintain. He sat with Dallas that first evening, over a map and a bottle of something they'd been saving, and they talked for 3 hours about what each community knew and what they didn't know, and what the patterns of Ravathi behavior meant when you looked at 6 months of aggregated data from both locations. "They're not random," Yusuf said. It was not a question. He had the tone of someone confirming a suspicion they'd been carrying alone. "No," Dallas says. "Not for a while. The attacks on our northern perimeter 2 months ago, they came from 3 directions simultaneously. We wrote it off as pack behavior, multiple groups happening to converge. We knew that wasn't right." He looked at the map. "You're saying there's direction behind it. We're saying there's a director." Yusuf absorbed this. He took a careful drink from the bottle and put it down very precisely. "How do we find it?" "We're working on that. And your man Thorne, he's working on it." What Thorne was working on in those 3 days was harder than anything he could remember doing, which was, admittedly, a constrained comparison. Reaver's sessions were part blood draw, part conversation, part something that didn't have a good clinical name. Yet, guided exploration of the network access he'd been blundering through. Intuitively, she sat across from him with a notepad and asked him to describe, in as much sensory detail as he could, what he perceived when he opened himself to the signal. He described. She wrote. She asked follow-up questions with the precision of someone calibrating an instrument. After the first session, she had 12 pages of notes. After the second, 20. "The signal has geography," she told him on the second afternoon. "The way you describe it. The variation in density, the sense of directionality, the louder and quieter regions. That's consistent with what we'd expect from a network that has physical distribution. Not broadcast, not omnidirectional. Nodes, and the nodes have locations. I can't map it," he said. "I can feel direction, but I can't attach it to a coordinate." "Can you feel distance?" He thought about it. More like intensity. The coordinator feels more intense, more present. "But I can't tell you if that's because they're physically close or because they're a stronger node. Close, probably. The pattern of attacks around your original camp, then the interstate ambush. They've been following your convoy, which means they've been tracking your position, which means they need line-of-sight range on the network signal, or close to it." She tapped the map. "Within 200 kilometers, maybe less. They're between here and the camp, most likely." He thought about the feeling from the night session, the particular signature in the signal, sharper and more intentional than the ambient collective, the human-shaped thing in the inhuman noise. "If I open it fully," he said, "if I stop filtering and just receive everything available, could I locate them precisely?" "I don't know," Reaver said honestly. "I don't know what receiving everything available would do to you." Educated guess? It would be disorienting at minimum. The network represents the perceptual inputs of thousands of converted individuals simultaneously. That's a great deal of sensory data that your brain isn't structurally prepared to process. You might lose orientation. You might lose yourself in it, temporarily. "But I'd come back?" I believe so. The integration is stable. You're not going to convert, but, she paused, there's a philosophical risk, as well as a neurological one. If you spend long enough immersed in a perspective that isn't yours, you start to build associations that are difficult to unlearn. The Ravathi coordinator has clearly been spending a great deal of time in the network. Something of the network is now in them in ways that go beyond the biological. You're saying I might start thinking like them. I'm saying you might start finding their reasoning legible, which is useful tactically, and needs to be monitored carefully. He considered this. Who monitors it? That's why I'm here, she said. He sat across the table from her for a moment. This careful, brilliant woman who had been holding the weight of the only viable research program on the planet for a year. Doing it methodically and without drama, writing things down in precise handwriting, and following each result to the next question, and not letting the size of what she was trying to do paralyze the small incremental work of doing it. Thank you, he said. She looked slightly taken aback. People in the current world gave practical thanks. For food, for ammunition, for specific acts of assistance. Gratitude for the shape of someone's character was unusual enough that it required a moment to land. Do the work, she said finally. That's thanks enough. On the second night, Thorne sat alone in the compound's northeast corner, which was elevated, and gave a clear view of the desert in 3 directions. And he opened the thing in himself that he'd been keeping shut. It was like pressing your hand against the inside of a very old door and feeling something press back. The network was there. It had always been there. He understood that now. The lean toward the east, the tactical knowledge, the bone-deep sense of patterns in Ravathi movement that he'd been attributing to some pre-collapse military training he couldn't remember. All of it had been signal. Signal from the network, filtered, attenuated, arriving as intuition rather than information, because he had been receiving, without knowing he was receiving, and his brain had been translating the data into the only forms it could present: gut feelings, hunches, the sense of knowing without knowing why. He opened it further. He was ready for the scale. He wasn't ready for the texture. The scale of it was staggering, not thought. The Ravathi didn't think in the way he thought. But there was something, a vast distributed awareness that mapped the location of every converted individual within signal range, tracked the sunlight hours with a precision that made clocks unnecessary, held the memory of every successful hunting strategy and every failed approach, and built from those memories a continuously updated model of human, defensive behavior. It was not conscious. It was not planning. Not exactly. It was something more like a river shaping itself to the landscape it was moving through, taking the path of least resistance, pooling where it could and cutting where it had to. But somewhere in the signal, there was something different. Someone who was thinking. He didn't find them on that first session. The scale was too large and his ability to navigate was too new and too crude. But he felt the shape of them. A particular signature in the signal that was sharper, more intentional, more structured than the ambient noise of the collective. Something that had once been human enough to retain the capacity for deliberate strategy. Something that had been waiting for Thorne to open this door. Something that knew he was there. He closed it fast. He sat in the dark for a long time after, sweating slightly despite the cold. And he thought about what Nakata had said about Kevin. 2 people in one head, and the fear of not knowing which one was doing the thinking. He understood it now in a way that was not abstract. In the morning, he told Reaver. She was already in the lab when he arrived, the lantern burning and 3 microscope slides labeled in her careful hand. She looked at his face when he walked in and said, "You opened it." "Yes. Are you all right?" "I think so. I need to describe it before the details fade." He described it. She wrote faster than usual, asking fewer interruptions, and more follow-up only at the end. When he finished, she put the pen down and looked at her notes for a long moment. "A coordinator," she said. "A partially converted individual who retains strategic cognition. We've had theories about this. There have been accounts from multiple survivor groups of Ravathi attacks that were too organized to be explained by pack behavior alone. They're in the network, but they're directing it, Thorne said. Like a node that has both input and output, rather than just input. And they know you can access the network. They sensed me the moment I opened it. Reaver tapped her pen against her notebook. That's an asset and a liability. I know. You can locate them. I think so, with practice. And they can locate you. They already could. He paused. I've been broadcasting since I woke up in that desert. I just didn't know it. Dallas said nothing for a long moment when Thorne told him. Then, so every Ravathi in range has known where we are since you arrived. Yes, but they were coming for the water anyway. I may have added some urgency to the schedule. May have. Definitely added some urgency to the schedule. Dallas absorbed this with the expression he used. For information that was bad in a way that still had an angle to be worked. Thorne had come to recognize that expression. It was Dallas's professional face, the face that meant, all right, this is the situation. What do we do with it? How long have you been receiving? Dallas said, without knowing it. Since I woke up in the desert, maybe before. He thought about it. The tactical knowledge I had. The formations, the weak points in their approach patterns. It didn't come from military training. It came from the network. I was reading their own attack plans back at them. That's why you knew which vehicle to watch on the interstate. Yes, and why you knew to watch the 7th vehicle today. Yes. Can you use it? Dallas said. That's what I was thinking about. The plan took shape that afternoon around the compound's map table, with Reaver and Susan and Dallas and Nakata crowded around it, and Thorne standing at the whiteboard that someone had saved from a school and writing, things in a handwriting that was careful and regular, and that nobody could place. Yusuf stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. He was the kind of man who did his thinking first and his talking second, and you could watch the thinking happening if you knew what to look for. When Thorne finished laying out the basic framework, Yusuf unfolded his arms. You want to drive back into their ambush zone intentionally, he said. Yes. Using yourself as the signal source. Yes. And your expectation is that the coordinator will need to be physically close to confirm the kill. The network signature I felt was, hungry isn't the right word, invested. Whatever they were once, they've been carrying the weight of directing the Ravathi collective for long enough. That defeating the immune has become the central organizing purpose. Something that has one purpose for long enough, Thorne said, starts to need to see it fulfilled. Not just to know it happened, to see it. Yusuf looked at him. You're describing compulsion. Yes. How do you know that's not projection? It was a good question. Thorne held it for a moment. I don't know for certain, he said. But I felt what they feel when they're in the network, the quality of their attention toward me. It's not strategic neutralization. It's something more personal. Personal, Nakata said, from the corner. They know what you carry. Yes. So it's not hate, she said. It's fear. The room was quiet for a moment. Fear with 12 months of organized action behind it, Dallas said. Yes, Nakata said. Kevin was afraid too. It didn't make him less dangerous. Here was the core of it. The coordinator in the network was trying to locate and neutralize the immune individual. Thorne, because the immune represented a threat to the network's coherence. If the antibody structure could be synthesized and distributed, the pathogen could be negotiated into dormancy in new hosts, and the Ravathi conversion pipeline would end. No new Ravathi, a slow attrition of the existing converted population, with no replacement. The coordinator understood this at least intuitively. That was why the attacks on the camp had escalated. That was why the interstate ambush had been planned. The coordinator was somewhere in the signal, moving, directing, probably in a protected position, a structure with natural UV shielding, probably in or near a large population of converted individuals who served as both protection and resource. We can't fight our way to a coordinator in the middle of an Ravathi population, Dallas said. No, Thorne agreed. And we can't locate them precisely enough to strike at range. Not yet. Then what? Thorne turned from the whiteboard. We give them what they think they want, he explained. Nakata listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Kevin, she said, would have said this is a terrible plan. Is he right? He usually was. She looked at the whiteboard. But he also would have said that terrible plans are sometimes the only plans that have a chance of working. The Ravathi don't understand why humans keep making suboptimal choices. They model us as purely rational. They expect us to protect the asset. She pointed at Thorn. They expect you to be in the middle of the convoy, shielded, moved away from risk. Right. And instead you're going to be the outrider. Visible, accessible, a signal they can lock onto, and when they move toward me, they'll cluster, because the coordinator will want to be close for the kill. Not because they need to be close, but because they want to be certain. They want to see it happen. That's assuming the coordinator is still human enough to want things like certainty. Everything I felt in the network last night, Thorn said, tells me yes, they're still human enough for that. The second day, Reaver's team completed the first stage of the antibody synthesis process. Not enough for a treatment, not nearly, but enough to establish the proof of concept. Enough to know the pathway worked. Enough to begin the scaling process that would, with time and resources, and the kind of stubborn, incremental scientific effort that was humanity's particular specialty, eventually produce something that could end this. They packaged the research. Multiple copies, wrapped in waterproof cases, distributed across all 4 vehicles. If any one vehicle got through, the work survived. They left before dawn on the 4th day, heading back west. The convoy was arranged differently this time. Thorn drove a motorcycle they'd found in the Nevada compound's vehicle bay. A big adventure touring bike that had been maintained by someone with both skill and affection, whose tires were good and whose engine ran clean. He rode 50 meters ahead of the lead vehicle, alone, visible, broadcasting into the network, with the door deliberately cracked. Here I am. Here, come and find me. He felt them orient. The interstate behind him was strange. Not eerie empty, which was what you expected. It was everything empty, a different quality. There were the wrecks, of course, the cars that had stopped going anywhere in the first month. Some burned, some merely abandoned, sitting in their lanes like parked livestock. The grasses were coming back through the asphalt in long diagonal cracks. Birds, a dog that watched them from the median, with the assessing calm of an animal that had recently revised its opinion of the food chain. He rode and broadcast and waited. It was like watching compass needles swing. Out in the dark and heat of the desert, dozens and then hundreds of converted individuals shifting their attention, their heading, their trajectory. The coordinator felt it too. He felt them feel it. The way you can sometimes sense the attention of someone in a crowd before you see their face. Good, he thought. That's good, come here. The Ravathi were excellent at converging. They were poor at distinguishing between invitation and opportunity. He was 30 kilometers west of the Nevada compound, the convoy a safe distance behind, when the first vehicles appeared on the horizon. 12 of them. 20. The flanking spread was less disciplined than the interstate ambush. They were moving faster, driven by something that wasn't quite urgency and wasn't quite need, and was closer to the thing humans called compulsion. Thorn pulled the motorcycle to a stop at the center of the road. He sat on the bike and waited. The Ravathi vehicles approached, slowed at 2 meters, spreading into an enveloping arc. He watched them do it, and felt through the network the satisfaction of the coordinator, distorted, not quite human satisfaction, but recognizable, in the same way that fire is recognizable, whether it's a candle or a burning building. He looked for the signature in the signal. It was close. Closer than it had been in the night session. Tighter, more immediate. The coordinator was in one of these vehicles, or near one of these vehicles. Something in a structure somewhere in the arc. Possibly the 7th vehicle, left flank, the one that was holding slightly back from the others. Not a converted vehicle at all, a vehicle that looked like the Ravathi fleet, but had been modified to provide UV shielding. He could see it now, the difference in the window treatment, the opaque panels over what should have been open cab sections. a daywalker. Like him, or like what Kevin had been. Partially converted, intelligence retained, hydrophobic, sunlight avoidant, but functional. Someone who had made the other choice. Who had let the conversion go further rather than less far. The voice came through the network directly, then not words, not language, but something that his brain translated into the closest available equivalent, the way a radio translates signal into sound. You understand what you are now? Yes, Thorne said aloud. It wasn't necessary to speak aloud, but he found he wanted to. You are the same as me, you will be the same as me. No, resistance is a delay, not a solution. I know. He kept his hands on the handlebars, and his eyes on the seventh vehicle. But delay is enough sometimes. Delay is how humans have solved most of the problems that looked unsolvable. The coordinator considered this. He felt them considering. There was something almost rueful in the network signal. Some frequency that in a human would have been the emotional signature of being told, something you already knew and had tried. To forget, he felt without wanting to, the shape of what the coordinator had been. Not specifics. The network didn't carry personal histories. But quality, the particular flavor of their attention, the structure of how they organized and prioritized, the small calibration of the signal that told him things about the person. Underneath the conversion, the way a handwriting sample tells you things about someone's education and their relationship with precision and their mood on the day. They wrote it. An organizer. Someone who had spent their whole life making sense out of chaos and finding the path through it. Someone who would have been, in a different world, extraordinarily valuable, who would have sat at tables, like the one they'd just left in the Nevada compound, and help work out the how of surviving impossible situations. That person was still in there, running the Ravathi because organizing was what they knew how to do. Even now, even like this. Thorne felt the grief of it like a stone in his chest and kept his hands on the handlebars. You carry a cure, the signal said. We carry the beginning of one. It won't reach far enough fast enough. Maybe, maybe not. He felt the convoy behind him. Well clear now, moving west with the research and the remaining daylight. How far is far enough? How fast is fast enough? Who decides? The vehicles were very still, the whole arc of them, stopped in the desert, waiting. Humanity has passed its threshold, the signal said. This is what comes after. Humanity has passed several thresholds, Thorne said. We're still here. He thought about the camp, the 32 people and the 5 children, and the well with its careful daily measurement of water. The raised beds. Dirk's Snickers story, told over and over, because the repetition was its own kind of maintenance. The graffiti someone had painted on the camp's inner wall, kill all vampires, which was a lie, because the people in the camp didn't want to kill all vampires. They wanted the vampires to stop being vampires, which was a completely different project, and a vastly more difficult one. And the kind of project that only a particular kind of creature would attempt. The kind of creature that thought cure when the rest of the universe thought neutralize. He pressed the network signal outward, not closed, not open, but modulated, precisely the way Reaver had been guiding him to modulate it in their sessions, the way the antibody structure in his blood was already doing on a cellular level. Not broadcasting vulnerability, broadcasting something else. The Ravathi at the edges of the formation stumbled. Not all of them, 4, maybe 5. The ones closest to Thorne's position, the ones within the strongest signal radius. They stumbled, stopped, stood in the desert, with the confused purposelessness of animals that have momentarily forgotten what they are doing and why. 3 seconds. 4. Long enough. Nakata's flamethrower roared from the east. She'd circled wide in the Land Cruiser, running without headlights, hitting the arc at its soft underbelly. And the rightmost vehicle in the Ravathi line went up in a bloom of orange and white. The formation's attention snapped toward the new threat. Macon and Dirk's jeep hit from the north simultaneously, the Centurion's mounted gun opening up from the south, and suddenly the arc that had been closing on Thorne was receiving fire from 3 directions, at once, and not receiving anything from the direction that mattered. Thorne drove the motorcycle straight at the seventh vehicle. He expected to feel the coordinator try to stop him through the network. Instead, what he felt was something more complicated. An assessment, a recalculation, and then a kind of resignation that sat in the signal the way rust sits in old steel. The seventh vehicle's engine turned over, tried to accelerate. The UV shielding panels were its weight disadvantage, and its turning radius was poor, and he was alongside it before it reached 30 kilometers per hour, and he didn't stop it with force. He stopped it with the signal, pressing his modulation against the network link that kept the coordinator connected to their converted forces, and for a moment that connection went quiet, and in that quiet, the coordinator felt what it was like to be severed, alone, disconnected from the vast distributed awareness they'd been navigating by. And Thorne felt them flinch, human flinch, old, involuntary, the flinch of the person they used to be. The vehicle stopped. Thorne sat on the motorcycle for a moment. He was aware of the battle behind him, still working itself out. Nakata's voice on the radio calling positions, Dirk's very creative profanity, Dallas's steady commands. But the immediate space around the seventh vehicle was quiet. The door opened. The coordinator was male, had been male, medium height, in the unremarkable remainder of clothes that had been practical once. The skin had the faint tracery of conversion, subcutaneous bioluminescence showing at the wrist, at the jaw. But the eyes were still human enough to be eyes, still doing the human things eyes did, reading, measuring, asking. Thorne took off his goggles. They looked at each other in the desert light for a long moment. "I don't know your name," Thorne said. The coordinator's mouth moved. Attempting language. The capacity was mostly gone, but some architecture remained, the way an old road persists as a trace in the landscape, long after the last traveler. What came out was broken and slow, and cost the coordinator something visible. "Doesn't," they said. "Doesn't matter." "It matters," Thorne said. "Names are how we're accountable to each other." The coordinator looked at him with the complicated gaze of someone who had processed more death than a single mind should hold, who had made the choices they'd made for reasons that had seemed like reasons at the time, and now sat in them like something broken that hadn't been removed. "Help you," they said. Effortful. Like pulling the words up from a great depth. "Couldn't." "I know," Thorne said. "Your blood cure." A pause, another attempt. "Won't be fast enough. Maybe. We're going to try anyway." The coordinator closed their eyes. The bioluminescence under the skin pulsed once, slowly, like a heartbeat from a very deep distance. Then they said, "Where?" It was the only thing that remained of whoever they had been. The ability to give an interrogative its proper shape, the care to make it a question rather than a statement. Someone who had once believed in the importance of precision. An engineer, maybe? A teacher. Someone who had cared about getting it right. Thorne said quietly, "East of Barstow, off the 247, north into the hills. There's a dry riverbed with water in it." He paused. "There are people there who will try to help." He had no idea if that was true. He was making it true by saying it. Sometimes that was the same thing. The coordinator opened their eyes, looked at Thorne for another long moment. He held their gaze. He didn't offer sympathy, and he didn't offer contempt, and he didn't offer anything that wasn't this. "I see you. I know what you are doing, and I know what it has cost, and I know what you were before this started. That's not nothing." The coordinator looked at him, and something in the network signal shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but the way a current shifts when the riverbed changes upstream. Something that had been moving in one direction paused. Then they turned the seventh vehicle east. Thorne watched it go. He thought about choices, about the fact that the coordinator had chosen, and it had been a choice. He felt the weight of it in the signal, the friction of it, the thing that it cost. To go east instead of doing the other available thing. He didn't know if the antibody structure in his blood could help someone as far along the conversion pathway as the coordinator had traveled. He didn't know if the camp would trust a daywalker, arriving uninvited at the gate. But he knew what he'd said, and he'd meant it, and the meaning had reached across the signal. into something that could still receive it. And sometimes, that was all the bridge you had and you just had to hope it held. The remaining Ravathi formation had fragmented. Some vehicles burning, some retreated. The collective coordination dissolved without its center. Dallas's voice on the radio. Thorne. Status. Situation resolved, Thorne said. He watched the 7th vehicle drive east until it was a small heat shimmer in the distance, and then nothing, continuing west. There was a pause. You want to tell me what just happened? On the road, Thorne said. I'll tell you on the road. He turned the motorcycle west and opened the throttle and drove into the last hour of afternoon light, the desert spreading out around him in every direction, immense and indifferent and strangely peaceful, the way very large things are peaceful when they are not currently trying to kill you. He drove west and let himself feel the network going quiet around him. The coordinated urgency of the last few hours settling back into the ambient hum of the collective, directionless again, reverting to the simpler hunting patterns that the camp had learned to manage. It wouldn't last forever. The network would produce another coordinator in time. This wasn't the end. But endings were overrated anyway. What mattered was the space you made when you didn't end things. The room you created for the next thing to happen. Susan's voice on the radio. Research intact. All 4 vehicles confirmed. ETA to camp approximately 90 minutes. Copy that, Dallas said. Then, good work everyone. All of you. Nobody said anything in response, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. The things that needed saying had mostly been said with the doing. The radio crackled, Nakata's voice. Kevin would have hated that plan, she said. I know. He also would have said it was probably the right one. I know. A pause. How'd you know to circle east? You told me, she said. In the briefing. Left flank is always the soft underbelly. You said it twice. I didn't realize you were listening that closely. I listened to everything closely, she said. It was something Kevin taught me. Her voice was steady and fond, and only slightly broken in one specific place. He said you never know what's going to matter. The convoy reformed and moved west, into the lowering sun, into the long blue shadow of the mountains, carrying in 4 waterproof cases the beginning of the thing that would end this. Not today. Not fast enough to save everyone. It was already too late to save. But fast enough, maybe. Far enough, maybe. They reached the camp with 40 minutes of full dark still ahead of them. The agreed signal went out over the radio. 3 short clicks, 1 long, 2 short, and after a long 20 seconds, the gate opened. The people who came out to meet them were the people they had left behind, changed slightly by the days of waiting the way all people who wait are changed. Tighter, quieter, with the specific wariness of those who have been holding their breath. The children came last, herded by a woman named Emily, who had been a kindergarten teacher, and applied the same patient organizational skills to child management in the apocalypse that she had applied before it, which Thorne thought was either remarkable or perfectly logical, depending on how you looked at it. One of the children, a boy of perhaps 8, whose name was Mira, and who had decided that Thorne was worth observing since approximately the 2nd day of his time in camp, walked straight to the motorcycle and looked at it with the assessing interest of a child, for whom machines had not yet stopped being wonderful. Did you crash? Mira said. The bike had acquired 2 new dents and a cracked instrument panel during the interstate ambush. No, Thorne said. Someone else crashed. Mira nodded as if this was the expected answer. Did you win? We're back, Thorne said. That's the same thing. Mira thought about this with the seriousness that children bring to logical problems, and apparently found it satisfactory, because he walked away to inspect Nakata's Land Cruiser instead, which had more visible damage and was therefore more interesting. Nakata watched him go. Her face had the soft quality it got when she wasn't monitoring herself. Kevin would have liked that kid, she said. Kevin sounds like he would have liked most things, Thorne said. He did. She looked at the gate, at the camp, at the people moving in the lamplight. That was the part I kept trying to fix. The liking things part. It seemed irresponsible. The world was ending, and he still liked things. She paused. Now I think it was the bravest thing about him. Thorne didn't say anything. He thought about the network going quiet in his blood, and the coordinator driving east, and the Snickers story, and the coffee cup, and Reaver writing things down in careful handwriting, because each result led to the next question, and the questions were worth asking. It costs less than it looks like, he said finally. Liking things. Yeah, she looked at him. You remember something. He didn't make it a question. I think I remember a woman, he said. Not her face, just the quality of her attention when she was thinking through a problem. The way she'd go quiet, and you could feel her working. He looked at his hands. And I think she's either dead or converted, and I'll probably never know which, and I think I decided, sometime in the desert before Macon and Dirk found me, that it was better to keep moving than to try to find out. That sounds right, Nakata said. That sounds like a decision a person makes when they're trying to still be themselves. Inside the camp, the generator came on and the lights went up, and someone started heating food, and somewhere a child made a sound that was unambiguously laughter, sudden and uncalculated, the best kind. The kind that doesn't know it's doing something important. Dirk's voice on the radio. Hey, Thorne. Yeah. You ever remember what that coffee cup was from? The one you told me about. Thorne thought about it. The ceramic weight of it. The heat of it. The specific sense of it mattering. Gas station, he said. He wasn't sure if it was a memory or a wish. Out here, in the desert, in the long year after everything. The distance between those two things had gotten narrow enough that it might not matter. Bad coffee, early morning, the kind of place where the guy behind the counter knew your name. Yeah, Dirk said. Yeah, that sounds right. He walked into the camp, and the gate closed behind him. In the medical container, Susan was already unpacking the research cases, setting up the equipment Reaver had sent with them, organizing the work of the next weeks and months with the same methodical determination that had kept the work going this long. Dallas was at the map table. Macon was checking the fence. The network hummed in Thorne's blood like a second heartbeat, quieter now, no longer hunting. He thought about the word accountable. And he thought about Kevin, who had been scared and been brave anyway, and he thought about the antibody structure in his veins that had built itself out of the collision between what he was and what had tried to make him into something else, and he thought, not yet, not today. He thought about what it meant to be an immune in a world full of converted, not a savior, not a weapon, but a template, something that said, this is possible, this negotiation, this coexistence, this refusal to become something other than yourself under a pressure that would have remade anyone else. Not heroic, not special in any way that required specialness to be rare. Human, just very specifically, stubbornly, inconveniently human. He thought about the question Mira had asked at the gate. Did you win? We're back, he'd said. That's the same thing. He believed it. He sat down on the edge of the vehicle bay, with his back against the warm metal of the motorcycle, and his legs stretched out in front of him and his eyes closed. And the desert night settled around the camp the way it always did. Vast and dark and full of things that were waiting, and inside the perimeter there was light and food, and the sound of people who had survived one more day, conducting the small ordinary business of surviving one more day. He had somewhere to be and people expecting him back, and that turned out to be enough. It had, he thought, always been enough. That was the human thing. That was the whole of it.